Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A lot of conversation in the comment sections the last couple of weeks talking about this Miami-Florida matchup. The boys are going to do a little bit of a roster battle, go position group by position group, talk about which teams have the edge. Really excited to get into this one. This isn't necessarily a game preview where we're giving predictions. We're going to take a look at this game from a lot of different angles over the next couple of months, but just wanted to get an early start on talking about these two teams. Extremely excited to get into it. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out both to the Miami and Florida fans. These have been two programs that have been a blast to talk about over the last couple of weeks, whether we're talking the recruiting trail, spring practice deep dives. Cannot thank you guys enough for all the support. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, but more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. We obviously know heated rivalry, a lot of animosity between these two fan bases. This is what college football is about. Whether you agree, disagree with some of our takes, you're going to disagree with a couple of Dill's takes. So let them hear it in the comment section. But without further ado, let's get into this one. Dill, quarterback position, first up on the board, Cam Ward, Graham Mertz. How we feeling?
I mean, these are razor tight in my mind. These are two of like those guys you feel really good about, respectively, heading into this year. I don't think either has a question. Probably lean slightly to Cam Ward just because there's maybe some upside that you haven't quite yet tapped. I mean, coming from Washington State, where you're typically under talent versus the teams you're playing, coming into Miami, where they're going to probably be more talented than most teams in the ACC. I think Cam Ward's kind of got that ceiling possibly, and he's already proven that he's a guy. I mean, he's really played well for the last couple of years at Washington State, but you look across at Graham Mertz, he stunned me last year. I was like, oh, Graham Mertz, what is Florida bringing this guy in for? Like, yeah, maybe he'll bridge it, maybe get you to DJ Lagway, but like, that's really, he didn't play that way. He played like a really high quality SEC starter in frankly really tough conditions where their offensive line didn't really help him, and they had a lot of young receivers. Graham Mertz is really good. I just probably lean slightly to Cam Ward just for some maybe a potential upside, but it's really tight.
Here I thought I was the biggest Graham Mertz truther across the country. I mean, I'm going to go Cam Ward as well, but again, I echo a lot of the things you said. Graham Mertz, probably one of the more disrespected quarterbacks that you see, not only in the SEC, but in the country. But it comes down to what you said. Like Cam Ward at Washington State did not have the run game, did not have the offensive line, didn't really have the talent at the wide receiver position that he's going to have at this Hurricanes program. So when I look at Cam Ward, I think the upside, like you said, much higher than it was at Washington State. I'm going to give the edge to Cam Ward as well. Dill, nice segue into the wide receiver room where you look at this Hurricanes roster and you have a lot more proven talent, right? Xavier Restrepo, I think one of the best wide receivers in the country over the last couple of years. Jacoby George has gotten it done as well. You also sprinkle in some young talent like Nikar and JoJo Trader versus Florida Gators wide receiver room where the returning production isn't necessarily crazy, but you have a lot of young talent, right? Headlined by Eugene Wilson, with guys like Aiden Mazzell and Andy Jean coming up the ranks. These two wide receiver rooms, what have you here?
I think I'm leaning Miami just because, again, kind of what you said, two proven guys, I feel like, in Restrepo and George, who both really played good football. And I think Jacoby George has another gear to get to, frankly. I think
Agreed.
You saw like that Texas A&M game. I mean, that's really dominant football, can get downfield, make plays there. And Restrepo really elite work underneath and making plays with the ball in his hand. I mean, frankly, I think Florida, I mean, it's going to be about Andy Jean and Aiden Mazzell. Like those two guys I'm looking for. If they step up and play good, I mean, you already know what you have in Eugene Wilson. He's a horse. He's really electric. But if those two play really well, I mean, you might have an argument for Florida. I just think Miami's far more proven.
Yeah, as it sits right now, you got to go with the proven production that the Hurricanes have. And I'll tap on and say, I think Cam Ward, Xavier Restrepo, I always look for this heading into a season. Like, where's that quarterback wide receiver battery? I think you're looking at one of the best in the country because you look at Cam Ward, watch his film at Washington State, loves those slot wide receivers. He's going to have one of the best to go to in Xavier Restrepo. You mentioned it, Jacoby George, a lot of upside that he hasn't even began to scratch. I think he has a lot of potential heading into 2024. Florida, I'm excited about. You haven't necessarily seen it yet. So I'll rock with the Hurricanes too. Now, going to this running back room, this is where I think it kind of gets interesting because you look at this Miami Hurricanes program and this roster, Henry Parrish to the transfer portal, Mark Fletcher with a lot of injuries that we're not necessarily sure if he's going to be ready to go early on in this season or how much, if he's going to be 100%. Dill, you look at this matchup, I'm going to lean with the Hurricanes here because I think the numbers are a little bit better. Whether Mark Fletcher's healthy or not, you have guys like Chris Johnson and Jay Allen, Trevante Citizen getting a lot of positivity in those spring practice notes. Versus Florida, you have Montrell Johnson, who might be the best running back on the field, but after Montrell, you're not necessarily sure who's going to step up. So from a numbers and depth standpoint, I'll rock with the Hurricanes, but this one could go either way.
I mean, in fairness, they both seem to have a similar issue where they have a really good guy at the top. I think you really believe in both those guys. And frankly, I mean, I hear you saying Miami's depth might be a little better, but it seems pretty negligible to me. Again, when you lose Henry Parrish, you don't really have a guy who's super proven. Jay Allen's had some moments, but not really a steady producer in college yet. They both, frankly, have the same issue where they're hoping some young guys play really good football for them. You're right. Miami might have a few, like a better number in there in just terms of who they have in potential. But at the end of the day, both need a number two to step up in a way that they haven't really shown in college.
Yeah, that's why I lean, because college football rosters, a lot of it's about numbers. Like, you just try to get as many talented guys into your roster as possible and just hope some of those guys kind of pan out and step up. So going into the season, like, you kind of trust just the numbers and the talent a little bit more for the Hurricanes. But Florida's got some young guys too. Cannon Daniels, I am extremely excited for as a true freshman. Going to the offensive line, this is probably the biggest advantage that you'll see on the football field. Miami Hurricanes offensive line, I think not only one of the better units in the ACC, but in the country. It was really good last year, but I think you're even going to see a better unit because a lot of those guys like Inez Cooper, Francis Mauino, only going into year 3, year 2, respectively. I trust a lot with what Miami has coming back versus Florida. An offensive line that I think is going to take some strides. Like, it was really bad last year, but when you go back and look at the film, a lot of the really bad last year was Damian George at that tackle spot, him kicking on the inside. You bring in Crenshaw Dixon, you bring in Devin Manuel from Arkansas. You feel better about the tackle play. I think you got some guys on the inside. This Florida offensive line, I think, going to be improved from 2023, but I'm not ready to give it the edge over the Miami Hurricanes.
No, and that's just, frankly, Miami's line will compete with a lot of teams who are really, really thought to be the perceived big dogs of the offensive line world. Because you look, I mean, you're right. It's like the 3 they got coming back, you really love. I mean, Jalen Rivers kind of came out, played really ultra good football.
Yep.
Cooper, Inez Cooper and Maui Noah, same thing. I mean, they got 3 guys coming back who are really good. Zach Carpenter, really veteran, like ultra veteran college football player at this point. They're just so solid. And again, like, Florida's just like, we don't really know what they're going to be, but like when you're going up against a Miami team where you know how good this offensive line is, and frankly, Florida didn't play very good last year. I mean, I don't see how you can go Florida here.
Last position group on the offensive side of the football, the tight end room. And I think for a lot of the same reasons I gave Miami the edge in a lot of these position groups, I'm going to give Florida the edge. I think the ceiling for this Miami Hurricanes tight end room is awfully high, right? Elijah Royal coming back from injury. Riley Williams, I think, a guy that is super talented. Elijah Lofton, as a true freshman, apparently taking over spring practice for the Hurricanes. But you look at that room and say, all right, that the production in that room was pretty much non-existent for Miami in 2023 versus Arlis Boardingham, who I thought really emerged as one of the top tight ends in the SEC. As we sit right now, you got to give the edge to the Florida Gators. But Dill, talk to me mid-October when we start seeing some of that young tight end talent for the Hurricanes, because it might be a little bit of a different conversation.
Yeah, and they just, again, like what you kind of said, they just don't have that proven guy that Florida does. And again, a talented room. And frankly, for these two teams who are recruiting the way they are, we'll say that probably a lot about a lot of these position groups. But you just look at Florida. I mean, they have a guy. They have the guy who Graham Mertz is really comfortable with. I mean, it'll be up to Miami to figure out some guy there, but yeah, I don't see how you could go Miami when you have a Boardingham who's been as good as he is.
All right, kicking it over to the defensive side of the football, defensive line. I like the Hurricanes here, and I am really excited about this Florida Gators team. Like, they got some young guys, LJ McCray coming in as a true freshman, guys like Kelby Collins, TJ Searcy, kind of coming up the ranks. They obviously added Joey Slackman, really good addition, but you look at, all right, who's the best player on this defensive line between both teams? You have to lean Ruben Bain Jr., who was just kind of a freak last year. It is so rare to see guys that young come in and dominate from a physicality standpoint that Ruben Bain did. You go to the transfer portal and grab guys like CJ Clark and Marley Cook. From a depth standpoint, I think the Hurricanes check a lot of boxes, but more importantly, from that top end standpoint, guys like Ruben Bain, guys like Akeem Mesidor, who was phenomenal in 2022, getting back healthy. You got to go with the Hurricanes on that defensive line. But this Florida group, it is talented, and it has some young talent, I should say.
Yeah, and this will probably be about as much I can disagree with you. I love this Florida defensive line, and frankly, I think a lot of it is you're probably right. Ruben Bain's probably the best player in this group. I mean, he was so good last year. I just look at the inside. That's where I kind of question about Miami in terms of like being really kind of more in that elite category. I just don't think those guys are game wreckers. I think when you lose what they did in that interior, I think it's hard to replace it. And I mean, the guys they brought in the portal they're solid players, but they're not game changers. I love Caleb Banks and Cam Jackson. I think those two played like really good football. I think people underrate them because maybe there was some inconsistency in the linebacker play and they gave up a lot of rushing yards, but those two held their own. Tyreek Sapp, I thought, played really good football for them. And then you're looking for Kelby Collins and TJ Searcy in my mind. If those two take steps, I mean, they're not going to be that far behind kind of those Ruben Bains, maybe those Justin Scotts in terms of what like their top end talent, because those guys have it.
So I need y'all to light them up in the comment section. I'm sitting here liking the Florida Gators defensive line. I'm not ready to take them over this Hurricanes group. A lot of the young talent that you said Florida has, I think Miami has that same talent, right? Justin Scott, Armando Blunt coming in, Marquise Lightfoot, Booker Pickett Jr. Like it is I think Miami has a little bit more proven first line talent, but just as much young talent kind of coming up. So I got to lean the Hurricanes. I know you're making some projections with some of these guys on that Florida defensive line.
I frankly, I think you probably make a case that the three interior defensive linemen in Slackman, Banks, and Jackson, I mean, they'd all start, I think, on Miami. That's kind of where I'm looking. I just think the interior skews heavily to Florida to me. And again, you kind of look, I mean, TJ Searcy's a guy. I like that they changed that defensive coaching staff and that defensive line room because they didn't do a great job the year before developing guys. If he's the type of guy to take a step, Kelby Collins guy to take a step, those guys are they're top end players. Like they can be really good in my mind.
All right, go into the linebacker room. And this is where I'm going to kind of be the Florida Gator boy right now. And I'm going to take this Florida Gators linebacker room. I think a couple things, right? One, you do kind of trust the production coming back with guys like Bassett and guys like Maui Noah. Maui Noah, I think, one of the best linebackers in the country. Dale Pup Howard, Shamar James. I don't know if you'll find a more high upside linebacker room in the country than Pup Howard and Shamar James. And then you couple that with bringing in a guy like Ron Roberts, who I think is a wizard at kind of scheming up linebackers, coaching them up, using linebackers in a defense. This is probably one of the position rooms that I'm most excited for across the country heading into 2024. Pup Howard, Shamar James, you sprinkle in guys like Miles Graham and Aiden Childs. I'm going to take this Florida linebacker room heading into 2024. It's close, but give me the Gators here.
I just think it's so hard to argue for the Gators when there was so much inconsistency last year, especially when you compare that to a team in Miami who have a guy in Francisco Mauino who's just so rock solid. Not just rock solid. I mean, he's really, really good. He's an NFL player. You kind of talk Wesley Bisante, really good number 2 running with him. I mean, that was a really good unit for Miami last year. And again, you just look at Florida, and I love Shamar James as much as anyone else. I really want to see him play good football. Been talking about him since he was a freshman, but at the end of the day, that play needs to come up. That play needs to get close to the level of where Maui Noah is. So going into the season, I don't know how you can take that Florida linebacker room when you have a guy like Francisco Maui Noah sitting in that room in Miami and just being rock solid.
Ron Roberts. That's Ron Roberts is why I'm taking this group. I'm so excited about what he brings to this linebacker room. Now, getting into the last position group we got to talk about, and Dale, it's no secret. Right? Throughout this episode, I have been all over this Hurricanes. I love this depth chart for Miami. I think they are one of the most talented teams in college football. If there's that one question, I have it in the secondary room for Miami. I'm going to lean Florida. And I think there's a lot of young talent for the Hurricanes that you're kind of hoping you can lean on. But you look at Florida, I think it's a better combination of young talent, guys like Jordan Castell, Bryce Thornton, Devin Moore, all going into year 2, year 3. But then you also inject a lot of guys that have played a lot of football, have that veteran presence, Asa Turner, DJ Douglas, Triquez Bridges, Jason Marshall Jr., we've seen him get buzz around being a first-round NFL draft pick. Didn't look like it last year. I'm going to lean Florida because I like the combination of young talent, but also veteran reliability, you might say, versus Miami. You have some young talent, but I don't know if you did enough in the transfer portal with Savion Riley and Michelle Powell for me to give them the edge. That being said, a little caveat before I let you go. I don't think Miami's done in the transfer portal in this back end of that defense.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you. I just don't think those two they brought in to kind of be those safeties are real difference makers in terms of, especially compared to what they're losing. I mean, they're losing 2 elite guys in the back end, and those 2 are solid. I mean, Michelle Powell, solid player. Savion Riley, same thing, maybe a little more upside.
Yes.
But I think at the end of the day, you just they're not guys changing your system. And you look at Florida, I'm kind of with you. I mean, you started to see those young guys emerge towards the end of the year. Guys who I kind of look at and like, ooh, those are some NFL type bodies. And I'm just not sure you have that proof yet for Miami.
Yeah, I think some of the questions would be like a guy like Jadias Richard or Damari Brown or true freshman Zaquan Patterson. Like, can those be guys? Can Zaquan Patterson specifically be a guy you can lean on in 2024? And if so, and you get a little bit more flexibility of where guys can play, kick Michelle Powell down to that nickel room, which it sounds like he's going to play, the conversation might change. But right now, it is March 31st. You got to ride with the Florida Gators here. So that'll do it. Dill, we're going to take a look at this matchup from a lot of different angles over the next couple months. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Please give Dill some heat in the comment section regarding that Florida Gators defensive line. Appreciate y'all rocking with the fellas. And if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.